Hello, my name is Aaron, and I am a banker, or at least I was until yesterday. And the reason why I'm doing this now is because, there's a curious lack of bankers on YouTube, and the reason is because no financial institution allows their people to actually talk about these things in this kind of way. Basically, it's either everything is released through official communications, or you have to go into that and talk to somebody in person. And I understand the liability and stuff that they're afraid of, but honestly, uh, I mean, this information needs to be out there. People have questions, and if we're not allowed to be on social media at all, uh, then basically the people who are left asking questions and answering questions are people who might not really know what they're talking about. And that's been a concern of mine for a while. I'm a fan of people like Legal Eagle, Runkle of the Bailey, Dr. Mike, basically people who are specialists who have some kind of insight into what they're talking about and who can answer questions or talk about things or cover things from kind of uh, an expert viewpoint, and that's really lacking in the financial industry, which I am no longer a part of as of today. So I am recording this because I had actually proposed to my former employer that I do something like this, like a couple years ago, and they shot it down on the basis on the grounds of no, we cannot allow that because of this. So, uh, hey, since I separated from them, and it was entirely cordial, it was health related. It was I can't work in that kind of environment anymore, unfortunately. So there's no problem there. I have absolutely no. If you know who I am, there is no problem there whatsoever with my former employer. I just want to make that perfectly clear. That um, so that being said, let me, that this I actually have a couple of other YouTube channels that I do. I don't do them well. I have one that is focused on Daggerheart content. That's why you kind of have this back here in the profile in up here. And I I'm a big role player. I and that's one of the things that kind of made banking something that I could do, is because a lot of role playing, especially the older style games, involved a lot of tables, involved a lot of rules, involved a lot of, um, and a lot of finance, a lot of financial stuff is just knowing what tables to consult. I've been an licensed producer in health and life insurance before in another state, certified on CMS related products and on partnership long-term care insurance. If you have any idea what that means, I've had these certifications. I've supervised a quality control support team in an ISO and QS certified environment, having to teach those things and having to enforce those things. And I've um, and hell, I played EVE Online for 10 goddamn years. From open beta, and for like the first 9.5 years it was open. It was in release. I've done a lot with numbers. I've done a lot with a lot of things. Um, I've always prepared my own taxes because to me we were taught how to do that in high school, and that's not really a part of of a curriculum anymore, as far as I can tell. So, um, but you know, there's always been this whole element of numbers, and a lot of my comfort level with dealing with numbers, with all these things like actuarial charts and all that, stem from my love of role-playing games, stem from, having to calculate that go if you're if if you remember second edition AD&D, that you know doing treasury or doing uh, treasures, random treasures, random encounters, having to set up things as a DM and a storyteller and all that stuff. It's If you do these things, you can get into a lot of things. You can wrap your mind around things that might actually surprise you. Especially when I was 20, I had no idea that I could do any of this stuff, right? I played games, right? I played Dungeons and Dragons. I played, a couple of other things, Vampire the Masquerade, Paranoia. But it's interesting how building those things kind of makes you able to do more than what you thought you could do. And so that so my introduction to the banking world actually came rather late in life, about 3 years ago. I'm 50 years old now, and that's and I could not have done this when I could not have done that when I was 20. And the bank hires young people. They hire people who are 18, 19, 20 years old. I was When I left my branch, I was literally twice as old as the next oldest person in the branch, and that gave me a certain perspective on things that I could bring a certain perspective to the branch, and that was people seem to appreciate that. Um, but uh, but just because you don't feel comfortable with something now doesn't mean that in 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, you may not feel comfortable. You may feel comfortable at it at that point. And never say that you'll never do something, that you'll never be able to do something, because as you gain more experience, as you gain more skills, just from doing silly things like playing games, you are adding to what you are able to do. And uh, so that's just kind of where I am, where I've come from. The main thing that you're interested here though is the banking stuff, and um, and I appreciate that. And from the beginning of the next video, that is all I'm going to concentrate on here, on this channel. This is just a short introductory thing that I wanted to do because I feel that it is important if somebody is like, well, who the hell is this guy? That there's something there, like an episode 0 that they can go to and say, oh, this is who this guy is. This is where he's from. I have been a banker for 3 years. I've done account openings. I've done loans. I have worked with our strategic partners in wealth management, mortgage, things like that. I'm somebody who's very curious. I was always like digging around inside of things, trying to figure out, well, why do we do this? Why do we do that? A lot of people who exist in the banking world, especially if they have always been in the banking world, well, that's just how things are. And I've come from it from a standpoint of I didn't have a good experience with banks. I have never really had a good experience with banks. I've always, I mean, I obviously, I play these complicated games. I'm able to understand things, but so oftentimes you don't understand the rules until you don't even, you're not even aware that rules might exist until you break them. And there's a very good reason for that. That's uh, well, there's a reason for it. I don't necessarily consider it a good reason. It's one of those things where, a handful of bad actors makes it very difficult for everybody else to operate. And and that was really concerning to me because when I sat there about once a month, I'd sit across the table from somebody who had never had a bank account in their life, whose family may never have had a bank account that they're aware of. They don't have an understanding of this stuff. They may be, reaching retirement age and they have never really had to deal with the banking system. And we have a lot of rules and a lot of understandings and a lot of like, oh, this is what normal bank account activity looks like. But if you don't know what normal activity looks like and you're just like doing things that, you could very easily run afoul of unwritten rules, let's just say, things that trigger alerts that you don't really that you're and you have no idea that you're doing it. And to me, that's concerning. And thankfully, my bank added a bunch of resources to that are available to our account holders, uh, so that those things could be addressed. And it's amazing what I went through when I was 18, 19 years old is so different than how things are today. With I remember, being handed a booklet and that had all the that had all the rules in them, and that was basically it. Here's your account, and and you sign the documents, and you get this little booklet. Nobody ever explains anything to you, and then you find out that remember this is before there's mobile banking for the most part. Right, we're talking like 1994. I mean, there was mobile banking. Well, there was a mobile banking that you didn't have cell phones, really, especially cell phones capable of, running an app. Uh, so, so you didn't have access to to all of this information. You didn't have access to your account information. You had to keep everything in a checkbook register. But if you have a combination of checks out there and ATM transactions going through and debit transactions, it's very easy to lose track of all this stuff. Some things happen right away, other things don't. You have to keep track of what is, what's hit your account now versus what's going to hit your account in 5 days or something, or hell, 2 months, depending on how long it takes for somebody to actually get the check that you mailed out through their system and back to a bank. And um, and to a certain extent, things are a lot simpler these days because of our access to information. But now I have all these disclosures regarding things like overdraft fees, which when I got my first bank account, I don't think I don't recall hearing anything about overdraft stuff, but it was applied to my account and I did not know it. And I remember there was one time when my next paycheck as a part-time restaurant employee did not cover all of the overdrafts that I'd had leading up to that because there was no warning about it. And it wasn't really something we were we were informed about, something that we were conditioned for. And that's something that actually happens a lot to young people these days, except that we limit how much in overdraft fees and how things are processed on the backside so that you don't fall into that trap. At least a good bank will do that. There are still banks out there that might do it the way that I experience it. And I don't think there's actually any regulations against that. They just have to explain how they process things. Uh, um, the bank that I work for is far different from what I experience, and that's why I was willing to work with them because basically they said, "Are you literally?" The question, one of the questions was when I was throwing out why I shouldn't work there and all that. The person who's trying to get me to work there, they said, "Can you ensure that the people that you help never have the kind of experiences that you had that made you so upset?" And I was like, "Well, if you let me, you know." You get the sense that a lot of banks that that's not necessarily the case, and so that's so and so I'm not naming any names here. I'm not throwing shade at anyone in particular. But I come from a very skeptical and cynical perspective on the financial industry as a whole. But I understand that not all institutions, not all banks, not all credit unions fall within that, that that same category of what makes me skeptical, what makes me cynical. And a lot of what make a lot of what made me skeptical and cynical in the first place was you don't know the regulations as a customer. You don't actually know being, what's allowed and what's not allowed. You may have regulations that you look up, but you don't know how those regulations are interpreted. Not only that, but you don't know how the regulators themselves enforce the regulations because just because it says one thing doesn't mean that they don't um hold a bank to a stricter standard than what may be held here because it's all about making sure that banks limit their risk exposure. And if they're really more lenient on one thing, that means that they generally have to be tighter on something else. And that's not something that you can get just by, looking at a bunch of rules and all that. And all that stuff is for any particular bank is considered competitive information. How they balance that stuff in order to make in order to make the regulators happy. Well, they're all going to do that in slightly different ways. And that means that some banks are going to be better for some people in some situations than other banks. And each bank is most likely going to have one area where they really shine. And so, although my experience as a banker is with one single bank, I understand that there are differences in how different financial institutions function within that framework. And that's something to keep in mind. And if you have any questions about this stuff specifically as it relates to you and your bank, go and ask. Ask people at your bank. Just walk in and say, "Hey, you know, I have questions." And hopefully you'll find somebody who's willing to answer your questions. I know some places, they've really cut their hours because you have the you have the ATMs with live tellers, and they're like, "Oh, you just you, uh, because of that, we only need to have people there for like 4 or 5 hours a day." Seriously, I mean, my bank did not make that decision. Good in my view, good banks don't make that decision. But we were also more of a premium kind of bank with a more full service kind of bank rather than a discount bank, and that can make a big difference because again, what do you want out of a bank? From our bank, you get more of a high touch uh, more of a high touch experience than at some other place. And certainly, if you bank with like a mostly online only bank, like say, one previous bank I was with was Transportation Alliance Bank. They have a single bank. They have a single branch location in Salt Lake City. They were established to serve the trucking industry, and really, and if you're an over the road trucker or you have a trucking company, it's a fantastic company to deal with. But that's because that's a very specific kind of lifestyle where maybe you're not, you may be months, it may be months before you get back home. And so it requires more of an understanding of that and accommodating that kind of a lifestyle um, rather than being a full service bank that does car loans and mortgages and credit cards and all this other stuff. They're going to be very tightly focused on that. And they're a fantastic bank for that. But I'll tell you what, once I got out of the trucking industry, which I was a truck driver for about 10 years, I let them go because to do, I didn't need to use truck stops as basically my bank, which is what you end up doing. You want to make deposits into a Transportation Alliance bank account? Fine. You go to a Flying J or a Pilot and you buy a gift card and you put money on the gift card and they call up Transportation Alliance Bank and you transfer and you give them the card number and the amount that you want off of there and they go ahead and facilitate that. And then that moves it from the from the gift card account at Pilot into their own account. I don't know if they do that anymore. That's how they did it when I was a truck driver. And that's how you deposited cash, which, on the one hand, that's kind of neat. On the other hand, it's kind of cumbersome, you know. Uh, so um, so again, that's just another illustration of how different banks have evolved to handle different kinds of customer bases. And if you aren't happy with the bank that with the services that you're getting from your bank, almost certainly you're with you there's a bank out there will that will better accommodate you. And even as a banker, I would tell people, I'm not sure that we're the right bank for you. You know, you want to do everything online. You want to do, everything. Yeah, we like to do Zelle. We like to do this stuff, but that kind of thing is considered kind of high risk. We saw, and I can disclose this, but I saw accounts being closed because shortly after they opened, they did a bunch of things with Cash App and all that stuff, and they considered that to be, kind of, you're moving money around like this, like crazy from this brand new free no frills checking account, and that makes it look that puts it into a higher risk category than the bank is willing to work with. And so that account might be closed. And so, but does that mean that they're doing anything wrong? No, it just means that they weren't perhaps with the right bank. You go to some other bank and that is willing to willing to accommodate that risk, but on the other hand, that bank they might not have as many products, as many services as we do, because there are other risks, other things that they're not willing to accommodate, because you have to balance it, right? You have to balance it. Otherwise, the regulators get all upset because you're introducing a higher risk of bank failure by tolerating riskier activities in multiple areas. So it's a so whether a bank is right for you is largely a matter of, talking with a banker and seeing, I know at my bank, I had to sit down and do an interview with someone. Somebody wanted a new account. I had to do an interview with that person, make sure I understood how they were going to use your account, make sure that I understood how they use money, their own what they're working towards, how they were working towards it, all that stuff, so that so I could help them be matched up with the proper banking services. And really, I think that that's something that is very valuable, because you don't want to be with the wrong bank, right? I mean, my job was as sales ish, not like at a lot of other banks where, that you get the where that might be a constant thing is sales, 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 sales. Um, it wasn't like that at the bank that I worked at, um, but it really takes that, in my view, it takes that kind of mentality. If they're not asking questions, you need to be asking questions as a customer. You need to be asking questions. You need to be understanding what how they view what you consider to be normal business, because you want to make sure that you don't have a bad experience there. If they're not caring about whether you have good experience or bad experience with them, you need to, because this is your money. This affects your life in a way that most other choices out there are not going to affect nearly as much. And if you don't understand how that bank, how that credit card, or how that credit union works within the framework of regulations, then, and there for a lot of people it may not matter. You just do the normal basic things. But do you know how everybody else uses money? What's normal for you may not be normal for the bank. What you consider to be just common sense may not be something that's in line with what they find acceptable. And that's okay. But it's good to find that out early on and be willing to walk away if that's the case. If you find out that that's the case, rather than sit there and try to fight it and get frustrated with it over because this is your bank, blah blah blah. You find the right bank, it's good to sit with them for as long as feasible. But if that bank is one that you're having constant fights with, could be that you're just not a good fit for it. And nobody at that and nobody that you're dealing with really wants you to continue to go there if there's going to be that kind of conflict. Um, and uh, and so if you recognize that that's going on, shop around, because and I get it. I'm in a city that is like the most competitive market in the country for banks. And we have so many different banks and credit unions here. It's ridiculous. So it's easy for me to change from one bank to another, or for any of my customers to change from one bank to another. Very easy. I understand that there are a lot of smaller places where you may not have that option. And if that's the case, well, sit down and have a talk with them. You know, sit down and have a talk with them. Try to figure out why you're having these issues. And if you don't have other options, maybe you do have to modify how you do things, because if you only have one or two banks in town, you don't want to end up unbanked because you just didn't understand the rules. You didn't understand how they wanted you to do things in a way that stopped you from losing your accounts. There is no incentive for anyone in the financial industry to keep somebody from having a bank account. I mean, in general, maybe you may not be the right fit for them, but believe me, we all want as many people involved as possible, because it can open up so many doors for you. It can help you improve yourself if you're willing to do the work to understand and use what they offer. And that's a big part of what I'm doing here. And I know this has been a really long video, and I don't know if any of you are going to find this interesting or useful. If so, you know, uh, leave a comment. Uh, if you have a question about the banking industry, if you have a question about products, I can't go into specifics into how it works at your bank or your credit union, but I can give you a general overview of things. Um, and I know the questions that people are asking because YouTube search tells me, if I say, oh, if I type in, why do banks, it'll give me a whole list of autocomplete things from people who are asking YouTube questions. So I know what questions people are asking now, and I'm going to be addressing those in the future. But if you have other questions, uh, feel free to feel free to answer them. I may not be able to answer the things as specific as you like, uh, because so many little details depend on but I can give a general overview of things. You know, I was a deep student of how all this stuff works, and I also understand the frustration that comes from being a customer who may not be with the right bank, or who is not very well informed because you just don't have the resources. You don't even know that you can ask the questions. Well, this is a safe space to ask questions, you know. Anyway, that's all I have for now. I'm gonna be recording and doing I have another video that's pretty much all set to go. Um, uh, and I hope that you have a wonderful day.